So today we're kicking off a 5-week sermon series titled God at Work, Living Faith Monday to Saturday. We're going to spend some time reflecting on the idea that God is always with us and us with God. And we're going to consider what it looks like to live active lives of faith when we're not gathered here for worship. To think about where God shows up in our jobs, in our caring for friends and family, in our cooking dinner and cleaning the house, in the everydayness of our lives, whatever that looks like for you. And I think that it's fitting that we begin this series as we celebrate Epiphany. Because what we see in the Epiphany story, the story of the wise men, the Magi, journeying to Jesus, is a pretty good example of God at work, literally. You see, the Magi were astronomers of sorts who studied the celestial sights, observing stars as they thought to learn about the cosmos around them. This was their work. This is what they did for a living. And God shows up in their work in an unexpected way. While going about their work as usual, the Magi discover a new star in the night sky. And as they dive more deeply into this discovery, they connect this star with the messianic prophecy of old that spoke of a star that was linked to the birth of a child who was to be king of the Jews. A career-defining moment, to be sure. But what strikes me in all of this is the Magi's decision to pack up and go, to follow the star. The journey had them travel from the east to Jerusalem, traversing the arid terrain of the desert, and then from Jerusalem they continue on to Bethlehem. This wasn't an afternoon hike. This was a huge journey. And the Magi, they weren't Jewish. So this king whose star they observed wasn't even to be their king. In light of the length and overall hardship that any journey in that time was going to entail, they could have decided easily enough to stay put and study the night sky from where they were. I can imagine their colleagues shaking their heads at them, wondering why go through all the trouble of the journey. But something was prompting them to make the trek to Bethlehem. And that something was in truth someone, Jesus, God in the flesh. God shows up in their work and interrupts the flow of the way the Magi thought things were going to go, inviting them into a new and unanticipated journey. Perhaps you can relate. You're going along with life as usual, and all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, comes a curveball. And it has you making a move you could have never predicted. In the fall of 2009, our little family was living in North Bay. I was working full-time in an office, and my husband and I were running a marketing and interactive media small business from home. Our son was 8. He was at a great school, and he loved spending time with his grandparents, 2 sets of which lived nearby. We worshiped at a fabulous church. We had incredible friends. Of course, there were challenges. There always are in life, namely trying to juggle full-time work and support the business, also recognizing the changing dynamics in the interactive media landscape. But overall, things were pretty good. But there was this thing happening in another northern Ontario city that was sparking our interest. My husband, Jeremy, had started getting into game design, and there was a buzz and growing opportunities in this field in Sault Ste. Marie. We prayed and talked, and prayed and talked some more, and even though it didn't make a ton of sense, we knew that we needed to move. Not entirely sure what was to come, we got the house ready and put it up for sale. And we started to tell friends and family that we were moving, which was met with mixed reviews, might I say, especially since we couldn't give a clear-cut plan of what was coming next. I remember telling people that we just knew that this was something that we had to do and that we trusted that God was in this with us. Some people got it, especially our church community and our small group members. Others thought we might be making a horrible decision. There was a lot about the decision that one could see as not making sense. We were walking away from guaranteed income. We were leaving a community with deep and meaningful connections. And there was a lot about this decision that was really hard for us. We were saying goodbye to so many wonderful things. Yet we were convinced and we were confident that God was leading us toward more wonderful things to come. As it turned out, my husband got a job offer in game design in the Soo the very same day that we sold the house. And once in the Soo, things we could have never imagined happened. A year after we moved, Jeremy ended up teaching at the college in the Soo and discovering his vocation as a teacher, something he's still doing today. And 9 months after we moved, I ended up starting seminary and the path into my vocation as a priest. This was God at work. What began as a little nudge in our hearts led to something more than we ever anticipated. And in many ways, it felt like we were catching up with the plans that God had for us. I wonder, is that how the Magi felt? They experienced that little nudge in their hearts, and instead of ignoring it, they listen and they follow. And when they finally reach the place where Jesus was, they are overwhelmed with joy and kneel before the child, treasuring him. Now, they didn't have to do this. They had no obligation to worship the Messiah, but when they gaze upon Jesus, they are surprised to find that God has shown up. And their response is praise and gratitude. And we aren't told what happens to these magi after they left Jesus, but we do know that they listened to God showing them the way once more. The story tells us that they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod. who was threatened by the birth of Jesus. So they left for their country by another road. They returned home another way. Through this encounter with Jesus, they were welcomed into the presence of God, and their way was reoriented. The word epiphany means a manifestation, an appearance, a showing up. And so at Epiphany, we celebrate the way in which God's self-disclosure, an expression of God's inexhaustible love and mercy, shows up as a child in Jesus. Not just for some, but for everyone. Not just then, but now. And not just here, but everywhere. Because God doesn't just show up here at church. God isn't only interested in our lives for 1 hour on Sunday. God is active in every aspect of our lives and wants nothing more than to meet us in the nitty-gritty of every day. In epiphanies, big and small, that just might surprise us, just might stir our hearts to a new way and invite us alongside God at work.